Hello, hello.
Hello there.
Give me one quick moment. I'm going to try something. You're the first person to be showing up on video on my OBS. Bear with me one moment. Oh, that's not good. Don't want that. We want... alas. Alright, that's not going to work today. We'll try that later. Oh, wait, no, of course. Of course, I have to do a pop-out. One moment. Oh, you're not on camera, are you? Okay, well, that explains it. Alright, that is fine. Turn mine off. Cool. Okay, well, that makes a lot more sense than why I couldn't pick up your camera.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. How about you?
No, not bad. So, I'm wiped out from yesterday. Absolutely tanked. I kind of want to just give you the floor to just explain it. I'm not even going to argue with you. I just want to understand like the beats of your position. That sound agreeable to you?
Sure. I mean, if you think of anything.
Like every time I've, well, I feel like talking to you in particular. If I asked you, like, I think with most people, if I asked them to give me like their system or something, and I hate when people ask that kind of question, that would be. It would be asking too much. I feel like with you though, you could probably like go from the floor up. My general sense is that's kind of how you roll.
Sure. I mean, if you
specifically like
if you come
like
to any
on like an ethical level, like the basis of the basis
I get you.
Yeah.
And once we get it all done, and we have the system understood, maybe you'll come up with some sorts of contentions or what have you. I guess we can play it by ear.
I'm kind of hoping I can identify those sort of in the workings of it as we go.
Yeah.
And then you can respond to those specifically. So I'm not just giving you like a litany of things at the end.
Sure. I'll just go with my opening statement that I've got for natural law debates here then.
Sure thing. Let me pull some notes.
So, you good to notate right now?
I will be in just one moment. Let's open up this. Come on. There we go. Oh, here we are. Right. There we go. Okay, let's try that. Yeah, we are good to go.
Alrighty. So, for centuries, economics and ethics have been bifurcated into two separate disciplines, economics being a value-free positive science, and ethics being a normative science, if it was even referred to as science at all. Murray Rothbard, in his two magna opera, Man, Economy and State and The Ethics of Liberty, successfully rediscovers the common origin of both sciences in a theory of property. On the one hand, such core concepts as aggression, fraud, exchange, rely on a prior theory of property to make any sense at all. Similarly, in ethics, or more specifically political philosophy, any ethic one proposes implies a system of property rights assignments. Rothbard, in deliberating upon how he could come to the discovery of a rational ethic, recognized two properties any ethic for man must satisfy. First, universalization, i.e. the ethic must apply to all of humanity, or else it would not be a human ethic. 2. The ethic must assure the survival of mankind, as the entire purpose of ethics is to determine how to live one's life. Moreover, no anti-life ethic could possibly be proposed as an argumentation, as argumentation being an action requires the party in question to be alive to do the proposing. In these two properties, Rothbard saw a proof for his ethics in the form of an argumentum e contrario. If it is not the case that a person A was the owner of his bodies and all goods appropriated by him, two possibilities remain. First, another person, B, is the owner of A and all goods appropriated by A. Second, all things are universally co-owned. A and B are equal co-owners of each other, and all goods acquired by either party. The first fails on the grounds of not being a universal ethic. It describes a society of two distinct classes, humans and subhumans. The second fails on two separate grounds. First, it would lead to the extinction of humanity, as in order to act, one would have to ask everyone else permission to act, which is itself an action, meaning no action could possibly occur, a denial of the acting nature of man. Second, co-ownership itself is impossible, as it cannot handle disputes over the co-owned means between co-owners, making it nonsensical to discuss as a property right. It is this recognition of a rational ethic that Rothbard rediscovered the natural law theory of old, systematizing it to the diffuse truths into a modern rational framework, much like his colleague Ludwig von Mises had for praxeology.
I'm not gonna cut you off at 5 minutes. If you can like go a bit slower if you want. You don't need to rush.
Okay, that's just how I read.
No, I understand. Just so I'm following. No, I
Okay, yeah. The science of human action, yeah. So Rothbard used as his foundation the works of late scholastics, including the great St. Thomas Aquinas, through to the more recent natural law theorists such as John Locke and Hugo Grotius. Furthermore, one can show that no other ethic may be rationally justified, even if we remove the necessity to adhere to the properties of human ethic. We show this through the modern-day successor to Murray Rothbard, Hans-Hermann Hoppe's masterful argument from argument. This argument notes first and foremost that truth claims can only be raised and disputed in the course of an argumentation, called the a priori of argumentation. Second, argumentation does not exist in a normative void. It does not consist of free-floating propositions not tied to any proposer. Rather, argumentation is an action requiring the use of scarce means. This, therefore, implies that one could never propose a norm that violates the norms entailed by the act of argumentation. As an example, one could never argue that it's pointless to argue. This would be called a dialectic contradiction, as the proposition is negated by the very fact of its proposal. Norms of this sort, that cannot be proposed as they contradict one or more norms entailed in the act of arguing, are denoted as dialectically false or irrational norms. Applying this to the property rights ethic, we have that argumentation is a conflict-free way of interacting. It requires that both parties make exclusive use of scarce means towards the same end. If in the course of an argument, I threaten my opponent with death, and if they dared disagree with me, I would not actually be engaging in an argument, as I would not follow the prerequisite notion that I agree that I may be wrong in the matter, and that I want to be right on the matter, and that I hope my opponent may be able to show me the truth should they have it. Moreover, natural law proper has a stark challenge that it must solve for, the fact of scarcity. Because resources are scarce, and because my use of a given means within a given domain precludes the simultaneous use of that means by others, the potential for conflict exists. Therefore, if we want to live peacefully in a society, which is the purpose of law, and given the possibility for conflicts, we need a peaceful, objective, conflict-avoiding system of property rights, which assigns the just owners. Therefore, any proper theory of the natural law has to take into account this fact that conflicts are possible and elucidate how exactly to deal with these conflicts. We come to the fact that given the shared goal of conflict avoidance, we can build out a libertarian property rights theory that solves this conundrum. Further still, what makes this a natural law is that it is set forth by the very structure of logic, rather than arbitrary dictates which arise from random assertions of ownership, say that of a thief who claims that he should own my watch, or that of a communist who says that the workers should own the means of production. That is, it is only the libertarian theory that is capable of being rationally justified. And that's it.
Okay, cool. So walk me through this step by step. Economics bifurcated from ethics. Let's just start from the top.
Sure. So Rothbard's note there was basically that, well, economics and ethics, they aren't really entirely separate fields. They both have a common notion of there needs to be some sort of theory of property rights. Rather, any ethic you propose implies a theory of property rights, and you require a prior theory of property rights to understand economics. So they're related through the theory of property rights.
Interesting. Okay, so economics then is something specific to economics and property. Are things specific to like a state of community, or are these things that you can have in isolation?
Well, economics is just the study of, the market, you could say. Essentially, it's the study of the man alone, Crusoe economics, and catalactics, which is the economy of exchange. And, you can the lines are then again blurred if you go into the hampered market, something like Rothbard does in Power and Market more specifically. where he goes over different types of hampered markets and what effects they have on, the market.
A hampered market. I'm not familiar with that term.
Hampered meaning like, damped. It's
Oh, hampered. I
yeah.
heard hampered. Gotcha. Okay, so you require a theory of property rights to have a theory of economics or a theory of ethics. So we're assuming that ethics then is, in some sense, concerned specifically with litigation of property rights.
Well, the ethics of the law, specifically, you could have ethics outside of legal concerns, but any ethic will imply property rights assignments. That'll be the legal part of the ethic, right?
Do ethical concerns obtain between communities, say?
What do you mean by that?
Are there ethical duties incumbent on one community taken as a whole by itself, in which you have like a self-contained economic, and I assume you could also have an ethical system, and between another one?
Well, I mean, the ethics I'm proposing here is interpersonal rather than intercommunal. So, I mean, on a meta level, there would be the intercommunal ethics, but it would just come purely out of the interpersonal ethics, because each person in that community is also a person who's going to have these conflict avoiding norms with every person in the other community, right?
Okay. We'll move on from there. We'll probably circle back on that eventually. Any ethic relies on a notion of property. You elaborate.
Rather, any ethic you propose will imply a system of property rights assignments. Let's, no matter what ideology you're part of, let's say that you're like, a welfare socialist. You think the poor have some sort of claim of property over that of the rich, or maybe you're a hardline communist. You think that the workers have a property right over the means of production. Maybe you're the Rothbardian sense of a communist, where you think every person has an equal property claim over everybody else, right?
Oh, okay, but those would be ethical propositions that implicate property. Any ethic you propose will rely on a notion of property. Maybe it would help to actually get a notion of property down. What do you mean by that specifically?
Well, a property rights assignment is just saying, basically, if I have a property in X, it's saying that any given dispute over the use of X, I ought to win out.
I think what I'm asking is, what is property in this case?
Property is just, I just explained it. Any property rights assignment, it's going to be saying, if I have a property in X, let's say the beer I've got here, if we were to have a dispute over this beer, the property rights assignment was just saying, hey, the theory of property, which is saying that I own the beer, is saying that I should win out in that dispute. I.e., it would be unjust for you to win out in that dispute.
I suppose what I'm asking is, for you to say that this piece of beer is your property, what does that mean? Or is it is that meaning simply borne by the statement that if I were to try and take it from you, therefore it would be unjust?
Yes, that is what it means to have a property in something, that you ought to win out in disputes over its use.
Okay, ought by what metric?
That you ought to win out, like it would be unjust for it to happen otherwise. Like, this is what makes it normative.
Okay, fair enough. So we're sticking to the definition of property then. And my question then, though, following from that is, okay, so according to what would it be right for you to win out in that dispute?
According to the ethic in question. I could have an ethic which says that gingers have a property right over everything, or rather that I have a property right over everything, then that ethic would be saying that in any given dispute, I ought to win out. That's what I'm saying when I propose that ethic. Oh, his mic's fucking up. Hold on. He's trying to fix now. You good to go? Or is you... Oop, I know he's, his mic's gone a little bit fucky. Yeah, what do you guys think so far? Yeah, I got it in the bag. Is it showing up on Discord? Ooh. Oh my. Oh,
Okay.
I can hear you. There we go.
I see a green ring.
Yes, success. What happened? Did your
Okay,
mic
brilliant.
just completely shit the bed or something?
I can barely hear you now, though. Give me one quick moment.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so up device defaults. There we go. Okay. Still hearing me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, brilliant. All right, good.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I tapped my microphone and just everything died.
Ah, classic.
Um,
Do you remember what we were... I think we were talking about what it means to have property rights, and, you know, if I propose an ethic where I own everything, that would mean that I ought to win out in every dispute over anything.
Right. So what an ethic means for you then is simply the apportionment, I guess, or the apportionment or litigation of who has, I guess the right of decision concerning some set of objects.
Well, rather every object, right? It's talking about what property rights assignment you're having, which will apply to, you know, anything which is appropriated, and there could be disputes over it, right? I.e., anything where there could... Yeah, I don't even think it needs to be everything that is appropriate. That would only matter if we're wanting to have a rational ethic for. But you could say that, you know... Well, I mean, it would have to be, I suppose, appropriate in some sense for there to be a dispute over it. Yeah, probably. There are maybe some crazy ethic which would be a counterexample to that, but, you know, it's just what is the ethic is saying what is going to happen in conflicts. At least the ethic as it pertains to the law.
Okay. So when you say it would be unjust for you to lose out in a dispute over something that's your property, definitionally, that's what the notion of property is for. It's to determine who is the proper victor in a dispute over control, I guess, or possession of some object.
Mm-hmm.
What would you refer that justice to? What confers that?
Well, it ties back to the ethics. So then we have the, you know, question of, well, I mean, can we just select an arbitrary ethic? And the answer is no, because there is only the Rothbardian libertarian property rights ethic, which is rationally justifiable. No other any other ethic, when you try to justify it, you would fall into a contradiction.
How do you mean?
Well, this is the argumentation ethics, basically. So, you know, if during an argument itself does not exist in a normative void, there are certain norms that you presuppose when you engage in an argument. You know, like my example above, You couldn't argue that argumentation is pointless, you know. We could think of another one. You know, I could never argue that nobody should be allowed to use scarce means, because when I'm arguing, I am using scarce means. So I'm presupposing that I should be allowed to use scarce means, whilst I'm stating that nobody should be allowed to use scarce means. So I've contradicted myself, so I must be wrong.
Well, you'd be inconsistent verbally. I don't know if that means you'd actually be cosmically wrong. Can you elaborate on how that would be?
Well, it's like Aristotelian negative demonstration, right? The proofs for, like, you know, law of non-contradiction and stuff like that. It's, you know, I am simultaneously proposing that I should be allowed to use scarce means and that nobody should be allowed to use scarce means, which is a bare contradiction. You know, I'm not actually saying that I should be allowed to use scarce means. I'm just presupposing that I should be allowed to use scarce means in the act of arguing.
Well, the contradiction would be insofar as you're trying to sell it as a universalizable statement, in which case you'd be caught in a lie. But what I'm struggling to see here is how that would actually materially impose upon you a requirement to respect the in practice the integrity of the position you were locuting originally.
Well, you physically could go against that. Like, you physically could say that nobody should be allowed to use scarce means, but you'd be contradicting yourself. So, you know, if we care about truth, which I would imagine we all do, you would know that that person has to be wrong because they've contradicted themselves. They've proposed two contradictory things. So whatever they're proposing can't be right.
Suppose I don't care about truth, for argument's sake. What do you say to that?
Well, then we don't have to, like, you know, listen to anything you said, right? You if you don't care about truth, then you can say all kinds of crazy things like A and not A, or, you know, A equals not A. You could say all sorts of crazy wackadoodle stuff.
Well, what if, for example, like let's say we had like a Plato's Republic type argument in which I proposed that we condition a population several generations down the line to have different norms from us, which will be scaffolded by like lies we tell them and things like that, but will result in overall maybe on your metric, like the maximal conflict avoidance in practice. I am making a contradictory statement in a way. I'm proposing something that's going to, well, I suppose I'm proposing the proposition of a contrary statement later on. I don't know. Help make this convincing to me. This is it's not going down for some reason.
I mean, would you at least agree with the case of the nobody should be allowed to use scarce means? Like, if that's a very, like, simple case, I'd imagine, of the argument from argument. Because if
no, I understand that, and I understand the relationship between making a universalizable statement.
Well, it's not even the fact that it's universalizable, because I could say that I shouldn't be allowed to use scarce means. That's not a universal ethic. That's a very particular ethic. But I would still be contradicting myself. It's not the universalizability necessarily, though that does play into the argumentation ethics proper argument. But for the argument from argument, rather,
it's universalizable in terms of it's a categorical statement about an ought concerning all of the elements in the argument itself. I guess where I'm having some trouble here is it seems like the ethical versus the non-ethical just hinges on consistency with our verbiage, and I'm trying to understand what
you could,
the weight of that is.
The specific verbiage isn't relevant. What's relevant is the logical structure that underlies all of this. Like, it would be, we know no matter what, you could not propose a contradiction, no matter what you were calling the different propositions and stuff. You could never get a contradiction to be true. So, like, you know, if I could say, you know, all dogs are blue and not all dogs are blue, that would be a contradictory statement, right? It isn't a contradiction because I said it and that projected it out onto the world. It just, you know, I'm, I suppose, less Kantian than Hoppe in this sense. I'm maybe a bit more Rothbardian, a bit more Thomist in my epistemology here. I think it's already a law of nature. It's already in the logic of nature. And we get at this through argumentation. We say, well, it can't be the case that all dogs are blue and not all dogs are blue, because that's a contradiction. It's not that that statement projects this out onto reality, it's that it was already in reality.
Okay, let's run with that then. So if somebody makes a contradictory statement, and I assume a part of this as well is whoever they're speaking to, because this is like a communal thing. They're engaging in a conversation with somebody else. That other person doesn't detect the contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Well. So what happens then? So you have the ethical statement proposed. They don't detect the contradiction. It is deployed with all of its internal inconsistencies, etc. What's the upshot?
It would be a lot like if we were playing chess, and I moved my queen in the shape of a knight, right? And you didn't pick up on it. Well, I mean, the pure logic of how chess works, it's I wasn't allowed to do that. That was a cheat move, So it would if I then did that to checkmate you, that would be the pure logic of chess would say that I didn't actually win, though you might think that I won. I might be a very good ideological salesman, and I might be able to be very convincing without actually caring about presenting the truth. I might be able to convince you that all dogs are blue and not all dogs are blue. Or, if we take the example from 1984, Winston was convinced that he was holding up 5 fingers, I think it was, right?
5 fingers was 4, yeah.
Yeah. You might be able to be convinced of it, but that doesn't make it true. The pure logic of the universe still determined what was true. And Michael Moreno has a good video on this. I think it's unlisted now, though, where he goes over that, well, debate isn't about persuasion. And we can say that, well, argumentation too is not about persuasion. If we have a debate between, somebody who thinks that the minimum wage would reduce the general standard of living compared to no minimum wage, and somebody who thinks the opposite, it might be that the person who thinks the opposite is very convincing. They're saying, well, this guy, he's a white supremacist, and he's engaging in patriarchal, logocentric notions, and this makes the whole debate ruined. And then the judges clap and they say, yes, that's right. Well, I mean, and then the other person there, the person who thinks that minimum wage would reduce the general standard of living as compared to no minimum wage, they, on a pure argumentative level, the rules of logic have already determined that, well, all their arguments flow through, so they are correct.
Okay. Now, the action of the person who is, like, let's go back to the chess analogy, because I like that one. You play your queen with the moveset of a knight, and I fail to detect that. So you've cheated, and you haven't really won a game of chess. But presumably you will have done so for reasons. Maybe you just enjoy the fact of having been perceived to have won a game of chess or whatever. And those reasons will, inevitably, because it's actions taken within the world, those reasons will follow through. They're baked into the world itself in a similar fashion. So could you not argue that in that case, you weren't cheating at chess per se? You may have been, you were cheating at chess from the vantage of somebody for whom the appropriate end is winning at chess. But were you not potentially engaged in another activity altogether while simply feigning playing chess to your opponent? In which case, my question then would be, whence the impetus to play chess when your opponent in a chess game, or in what they believe is a chess game, believes that you are attempting to play chess?
Well, this is why it's argumentation ethics specifically, because argumentation is a very important type of activity. It's the activity we're using when we're trying to justify something, right? So if you are caring about the truth and you're caring about justifying things, you have to use argumentation. You're not using mere persuasion. So, you could engage in mere persuasion or babbling, as Hoppe puts it. You could engage in that activity, and you might rouse a bunch of people to your support. But you haven't actually justified your ethic. You are engaging in an objectively unjust manner.
So if you make an argument that is not true, but you intend the truth, but it nonetheless is itself untrue or bears within it certain things that are maybe even obscure to you, does that cease to be an argument and become mere persuasion if it has uptake?
Well, no, if you are genuinely seeking the truth, then you are still making propositions. But some propositions, given that you are actually trying to seek the truth, are self-defeated. They are refuted by their very proposal. So, if you continued going along and you were like, well, I see that this argument is self-defeating, I'm just going to continue proposing anyway, you're not actually engaged in argumentation at that point.
Okay, so the truth of the argument itself doesn't matter. It's your awareness of its untruthfulness that disqualifies it from being an argument.
That's what would disqualify it from being you actually acting an argument, yes. But it would, it's... Some arguments would be contradictory and thus false. Like, I could propose that all dogs are blue and not all dogs are blue, but that would be a proposition which is incorrect. So I'd be wrong there. So if I was genuinely engaging in proper discourse and someone pointed out that this is wrong, I would have to concede, and I would go, okay, yeah, fair enough, you're right.
What if you knew it was wrong, but nobody else pointed it out?
Well, then you're not engaged in argumentation. You're not trying to get at the truth, are you?
I see. So argumentation is trying to get at the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the definition of trying to get at the truth is trying to get at the truth.
Well, the definition of it's just you are trying to get at the truth. I think we both know what trying to get at the truth means, right? It's not you're trying to convince people by any means necessary to accede to your position. It's you are trying to convince them. You are essentially proposing your position as a test for other people to attack it, to see how solid your position is. That's what true dialectic is.
What if you register a defect in your interlocutor such that by merely arguing in good faith, you actually can't reach the truth?
How would that come about?
Well, for example, it may be the case that the truth of a matter requires some sort of set of presumptions that your interlocutor is incapable of sharing for some reason. Like you take the Plato's Cave example, where you have people who are chained up against a wall. They can only see shadows. Like the rules of their universe, while they're derivative of the rules of the real world, like what they perceive, your argumentation concerning things that are more true in an objective sense will likely not obtain in their most literal rendition when you are arguing with people in that position when you're not, right? And so what you might do is you might sort of study how they talk, and you might communicate things that are untrue, but tend your interlocutor more towards perceiving what the truth is.
So you're talking to somebody in Plato's Cave, and you like tell them fibs to try and get them close to the truth.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that doesn't really sound like argument to me. Argument is, you are saying this is true, and the other party is saying, well, this is true actually, and then these ideas fight out. This just sounds like, trying to lead someone, to a different position.
Is truth produced by the argumentation, or does it exist apart from it?
No, it exists apart from it. Argumentation just allows us to map out what is true. This is why I'm saying I'm more Thomistic than Kantian.
Sure. So in the context of an exchange, because we use the term exchange for something we haven't determined it's an argument on your definition yet. In the context of an exchange, it is possible then that one party perceives the truth and one party doesn't, but they can both be engaging in argumentation. Yes?
Yes, one party could know the truth. I mean, that would have to be the case on an argument over anything true. One party would have to know the truth and the other party wouldn't.
Well, so assuming one party even is correct at all to begin with, like they could be arguing about something that's untrue.
In which case, neither would be true, but they both think that they're true at the very least. And they both agree that the other party might be able to get them closer to the truth, through some sort of synthesizing.
Okay, so in addition to this, we're adding the condition that the parties have to be equally able, yes?
What do you mean by equally able?
Because because if argumentation is defined as basically just an interpersonal exchange to the end of truth seeking. Well, if one party has better access to the truth and is better able to get to the truth, and the other party is perhaps not amenable even to argumentation to get there, because of course people can be unconvinced by a true argument, then it would seem to follow that argumentation, as you've described it, either must extend beyond simply telling true statements, or argumentation may be not actually the most efficient way to get the truth in some cases.
Well, it might not always be the most efficient way to get to the truth, but we still have this division of labor of sorts. If you are engaging in an argument with anyone, you have to accept that they might have the truth, or else you wouldn't bother arguing with them.
I mean, maybe the argument is just to get them to a point that you've already confirmed for extrinsic reasons is true. Like, for example, if I'm having an argument about the contents of Plato's Republic, say, and I know that I'm arguing with somebody who has never read it, maybe because they're like 15 years old or whatever, and they've just learned to read. Like you see the.
It goes back to the Aristotelian notion that I know that I don't know, right? That you are engaging in an argument to test your own beliefs against some attack that you might not know about, because there's always unknown unknowns. It might be the case that, somebody comes along with some incredible refutation of the action axiom that I just never considered before, which is why I would engage in an argument over the action axiom, because I would want to test it, and that's why I engage in arguments over the argument from argument, because there might be some refutation I haven't heard before.
Sure, but you don't just enter into argumentation in order to test the truth of your position. Like, for example, if you're talking to a population that is completely an expert in what you're discussing, doesn't even have like a groundwork understanding of the relevant ideas such that they can challenge you to begin with, you're arguing with them for some other reason. And it may be still to get them to the truth of a position so it influences their actions, but you're arguing with them not for the sake of testing your positions, because for potentially, like, this is not the first time this has happened. You've already tested your positions, and you're just trying to convince people of the truth of a position, which is nonetheless true. Like, it doesn't strike me as it strikes me as a little bit strange to say, like, as the basis of an ethic, that you presume in all cases that your position is equally likely to be as untrue as your interlocutors.
Well, like, in terms of the basis of an ethic, I don't know how. We're going very into the weeds of what specifically an argumentation is, but I think we probably already have enough to do the ethics, but we can continue down this path if you want. Like, I can go down this path further.
Well, why don't we bookmark this, and we'll see if we need to come back to it.
Sure. So, like, given we have this, you could not propose something which would contradict with a norm of argumentation. Do you agree with that? Like, in the abstract, we can get down what exactly those norms might be. But in the abstract, could I argue something which contradicted a norm of argumentation?
Could you argue something that subverted the conditions of arguing?
In a manner of speech, yeah. Like, could I argue that argumentation is pointless?
Potentially, if you want to also grant that pointless activities may nonetheless be engaged in, and perhaps the point that was being made wasn't being made by argumentation. You were attempting by that specific locution to demoralize your interlocutor to the point where they simply agreed that argumentation was pointless, even if the point of the locution itself as an argument wasn't to that end.
But then in that case, the argumentation would have a point. The point would be to demoralize.
The argumentation would have a function, but the content of the argumentation wouldn't have a point. So if you said what the point of the argument was,
I'm just saying, could I argue that argumentation in general, like the act of argumentation, like let's take a more praxeologic, hardcore example. Could I argue that nobody should ever argue?
Yeah, I don't see that you couldn't.
Yeah, so that would
You'd be breaking the whatever implication. If that was in some way, if the outcome of that was in some way ethically binding on you, you would be doing something unethical by doing so. But you could do so. It seems to me.
Yeah, so like, we have at least, it must be the case that there's a normative presupposition that you should at least sometimes argue in based on argumentation. So you couldn't dispute that you should
Not
at least
necessarily.
sometimes.
I think, well, not necessarily. I think you could say something that is against what you should say. Like,
Well, you could physically say
nobody
it, but you'd be wrong, is the point.
well, yeah, you'd be wrong according to what you said.
Yeah, but that we don't. When we're in argumentation, we don't concern ourselves with falsehoods. Well, we would reject something that we know is a falsehood.
Well, hang on.
rather.
Is that a falsehood, or is that like breaking etiquette? Like, it seems like you're not necessarily saying something false, because if it is the case that you must not argue, it seems that it's possible that in order to get at an understanding of what we must not do, we must break that rule.
Well,
Like a fruit in the Garden of Eden type thing.
well, no, that's just I could not possibly argue. We agreed on this. I could not possibly argue that you should never argue. So therefore, the negation of that you
I don't
ought
necessarily think I do
sometimes
agree with that.
argue. I mean,
Well, no, because that assumes that we simply must have an understanding of the outcome of that argument. But it might be the case that it is a true statement that we must never argue. But as a consequence of that, we must actually, and we don't know this because you need to argue in order to get to understanding of that, we must never do the thing that would make us learn that we must argue, because to do so would be to argue.
So it's that you ought not ever argue, but that
Yeah.
to find that out you have to argue.
Yeah.
I mean, but it would be a contradiction. We know that that can't be the case because it would be a contradiction to propose, again, negative demonstration. It would be a contradiction to propose that you ought never argue. So that has to be false. It could never be proposed.
Well, no, it would be well, no, because the content of it is that you ought never argue, not that you shall never argue.
Right, but if you are making any ethical proposal at all, you have to do it in an argument.
Sure, but then it may simply be the case that the ethical proposal must not be made. However, in order to understand the consequence of that ethical proposal, it must be made in the form of an argument. Ergo, you would be breaking the ethics as a wrongdoing agent, not necessarily saying something false, in order to do so.
But then that would be an ethic we need not ever concern ourselves with, because it could never be proposed for consideration.
Not only that, it would be an ethic we need not ever concern ourselves with. Like, almost definitionally, it would require that we not concern ourselves with it.
Yeah, so we ignore such ethics, and we just go to the ethics which we can actually propose, because that is what, myself and yourself, as arguing individuals, that's what we're both doing. We're both trying to propose, different arguments and battle them against each other. So if either of us care about ethics at all, then we concern ourselves with the ethics which are compatible with the act of argumentation.
Is that necessarily true, though? Because what if I conjecture that there might be some sort of ethical impetus beyond what we actually can arrive at through argumentation in that way? Like for example, maybe it is indeed the case that we have some cosmic need to never argue. Well, suppose I want to I want to make that I want to know that so that I can prevent future occurrences of people arguing to discover that fact in the future. There could be there could be ethical dimensions that are simply not amenable to argumentation, either as it is now, or which require unethical action in order to obtain, but are nonetheless worth doing so. Not necessarily for ethical reasons. We just might deem it better to be living with full knowledge of our ethical duties or whatever.
I mean, I don't know how this would ever be epistemologically available to us. If it is true, I don't see how it would be true. Like, what epistemology could we possibly utilize to get to this?
Maybe it's not, but in the example we gave, there was a specific way described. Like, we can arrive at a knowledge of the truth of the statement, even though the statement itself, according to the truth of its statement, should never be uttered. We can arrive at knowledge that argumentation.
But do we have an actual
Western
example of
argument
such
by
a
argument.
statement?
We just have the hypothetical one we're talking about now. Alternatively,
Right, but then
there's the whole.
this foil would rely on such a thing actually existing, which I don't see why we should expect such a thing to exist.
Well, it's not necessarily required that we expect such a thing to exist for it to exist. It may be that there are dimensions to the world that we can only arrive at an understanding through things that are not amenable to this understanding of ethics, but nonetheless would, once known, enrich an ethical understanding. Maybe.
So then maybe, whilst we don't have that available to us, let's just go with what we do have available, which, is based in argumentation. Do the best with what we got, in a way of speaking.
Sort of, but this takes us back to the principle, though. We don't necessarily arrive at something that's specifically untrue by arguing in contradiction to the conditions of argumentation, say, or arguing against future argumentation. It may be that what we arrive at is simply something that renders this mode of extrapolating an ethics problematic in some way.
It's a lot like saying, well, maybe it's the case that all dogs are blue and not all dogs are blue, but just when we try and state it, we get into a contradiction over it. So we can't access the fact that all dogs are blue and not all dogs are blue. I mean, it's just a contradiction, right? That's what contradictions are. They're falsehoods.
Sure, okay. So to be clear, though, then, what is being privileged here isn't the logic of the world. It's the logic of discourse in particular.
But the logic of discourse is the logic of the world. It's just logic.
Well, not if it leads to contradictory statements with the actual facts of the case, right? Like that would be something that sort of floats on top of it, but it doesn't actually accurately reflect what's actually the case. If it is possible for dogs to be both blue and red at the same time, we discern like an irreconcilable paradox in how we speak about that. But that would mean that our speech, if that indeed was the case somehow, that would mean that, in fact, the results of our argumentation about that are contradictory, but it's not contradictory in the world. Like these are operating on different planes.
Well, like that's, you have to then assume contradiction for your foil of argumentation ethics to stand, which is, the ultimate defeat for an ethic, I would imagine.
Only if you require consistency with discourse to be or the logic of discourse rather to be a condition of truth, but it's not clear to me that that's the case.
I mean, do you disagree that the law of non-contradiction holds in logic?
Within logic, but within logic is to say within discourse.
Yeah, but like
So,
logic
when
is this is the logical structure of the universe. Logic is what defines what is true.
Well, hang on. We don't really have access to the logical structure of the universe. We know that in our experience, how we interpret things and in terms of how we think things, that when we do so, we find that we cannot hold contradictory properties within the same object, either as speech or in perception or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily bleed out into sort of like the world beyond our intuition, right? We don't have access to that.
I mean, this strikes me as a very Heraclitean view, like, well, in the real world there's contradictions, so it must be...
It's very Kantian is what it is.
Right, and then it's wrong, it's these laws, they aren't... It's almost in a way anti-Kantian in that I'm not saying that these laws of discourse are projected out onto the universe. They aren't projected out by the mind. They exist in the universe and the mind perceives them. I'm almost like, the Austrians are going to get pissed off at me. I'm almost like an empiricist in that way, but a pre-Humean empiricist, more of an Aristotelian type empiricist, right?
I think
These laws exist in nature.
Yeah.
The laws of logic are existent in nature. It's not just that we came up with them as rules for how to understand discourse. It's that they necessarily hold true. It could not be that A and not A. Because, to propose the opposite, that it could be that A and not A,
Precisely.
would lead... you are utilizing the law of non-contradiction in proposing anything.
I agree with you, which puts a massive limitation on us. But even notice how you said that. It's to propose. We're talking entirely within the realm of interpersonal, or even like an internal monologue. We're talking about human cognition and human speech. We're not talking about the universe itself. Now, we are within the universe, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the conditions of our thought and experience are concordant with it in that way. Like, it could be the case that there are principles that hold true of things beyond our perception and cognition, that just by dint of being so, we can't actually involve in our speech, but could nonetheless be actually quite true.
So, like, is the only foil for argumentation ethics if we assume that contradictions are allowed, then?
No, I think what I'm getting at is we're in a situation where the truth of argumentation ethics doesn't appear to be, and you can correct me on this, it doesn't appear to be its actual force. It appears to be the case that you seem to be relying upon adherence to some principle that allows the prolongation of a certain kind of social activity in order for it to be useful enough to be deemed a viable ethics by itself. And that strikes me as not a case that you can't actually sustain. Sorry, I should say that strikes me as a case that you could sustain. But my question following from that is, okay, but then given the fact that we can easily imagine there to be like truth claims that implicate things that are not that are either not amenable to that specific sort of notion of argumentation, or whatever, like different causalities, as Kant might say. Where is the force then? Like you say, for example, that. Oh, what did you say earlier? Like, where is the impetus in the chess example? Where is the impetus to play chess instead of not?
You were
chess?
saying, given that you're playing chess, this would be an impermissible move. So, given that you're arguing, this would be an impermissible move. So, you could not propose something, because the only way to propose things to others is in an argument.
What is an ethic as you understand it? What does that mean?
Well, I'm a very natural law focused guy, so the ethic is whatever you are using to propose what property rights assignments are. So it's the root of your property theory.
So an ethic is whatever you are using to propose whatever property rights assignments are.
Yeah.
And then property rights, or let's say the property rights are property rights are the claim to the justice of winning a dispute over the property.
I think we face a very stark epistemological gap here, where you think it's possible for there to be some laws of logic outside those that we have access to, where contradictions are fine and all that.
Not laws of logic. I suppose you could say, given that our logic appears to be constrained by specifically human modes of speech, which are downstream from human modes of experience, and intuition, and forms of intuition, I guess, rather, it strikes me as a leap to say that encompasses things outside that give rise to that, because we're sort of like we're in Mario 64 right now, and we're talking about the laws of physics governing like how high you need to fall to sustain fall damage in Mario 64, but that has no bearing whatsoever on the physics of the world outside of it. It implicates them. It's downstream from them in some critical ways, but within that simulation, the rules are completely different. The relations are completely different. There are different chains of causality.
Even within Mario 64, the axioms of that universe, you could say, of the metaphysics of that world they are in, you would say an axiom is something where, well, if you were to try and dispute it, you would have to use it in your disputing of it. That's what raises something to the level of an axiom.
Sure, but given the fact in our discourse we can imagine a sphere beyond which that
I
obtains.
don't think I can imagine that there is a sphere beyond the metaphysics of reality. That is reality. That is all that is available
Wait,
to
well,
us. So
hang on.
within this sandbox of reality, what rules are there? Well, there are the rules of libertarianism. We can
But
be all
very
spiritual and say, well, there's actually something beyond that, but you could never argue that. So the only solution left for you is to never propose that ever, never to say it. To borrow a phrase from Rothbard, to shut up about it.
Oh, okay. So I see. So you can imagine the exact relationship obtaining between this universe that you and I are inhabiting right now and something else. By reference to again the fact that we even see within our universe that we can sustain similar types of, I guess, different spheres of existence in the same way that we play a video game and then sort of transpose our experience into that. I guess then my question following that is, so see my mind would go, okay, well basically you're a pragmatist then. But when's the impetus to that?
Not a pragmatist as such. It's that we live in this universe. We, by definition, don't have epistemological access to anything outside the metaphysics of our universe. That's what it means to. That's what metaphysics is everything we could know, possibly, right? So why bother to concern ourselves with that? We have this universe right here. Let's concern ourselves with what are the rules governing this universe. And the rules governing this universe, normative rules, are libertarian rules.
Does metaphysics concern everything we could know?
Yes, I think that's. I watched a lecture on it a while ago. I'm watching through a lecture physics on philosophy at the moment. It's like Thales. He went over what metaphysics is. It's like everything. I mean, there's very little from Thales, to be fair, but metaphysics is knowledge of all of reality. Epistemology is knowledge of knowledge in a way. Etc. etc. If there's something outside of reality, there's an epistemological boundary there. We couldn't know that, so why bother concerning ourselves with what that might be? If it could even exist, we don't know whether it could exist. It's definitionally unknown. We could never get there. So let's concern ourselves with what we can know in the here and now, to deal with what rules there are governing this universe. Even I don't think you are a libertarian even in this universe. But you should be a libertarian in this universe, because the rules governing this universe, they arise that, well, you ought to be libertarian.
Well, the rules govern the speech, and we're equivocating here between this universe and the way in which we perceive and the way in which we interact in argument.
I mean, you are showing that you care about the rules governing speech by using speech, right? You are engaging in argument, so you could not ever propose any anti-liberty ethic in anything you do.
What if I care about something else more that can't be encapsulated by speech? Even if it's in a very vague sense, like when we're referring to metaphysics, it's simply which is beyond speech.
What would it mean to care about that more? Because then you are contradicting yourself in proposing it, no matter what. So you could not propose that, because, in your sense even, if logic governs the rules of speech, you could not consistently propose this. So you'd be, by definition, wrong in the terms of logic. If logic is to deal with speech, then you are, by definition, wrong, as logic cares about it. I think that's the ultimate defeat.
Well, as logic cares about it, but for example, you could engage in argument in a very kind of charitable mode, where by dint of hitting upon certain erroneous statements that don't get at the thing that we are attempting to gesture towards, and we are even failing to gesture towards it insofar as we're regarding it as a thing, nonetheless, by that interplay, there could arise in our imagination the abstract notion of there being an opening or something else that hasn't been directly implicated in our speech thus far. And then that now starts to become that now starts to exert its own force on us, because now we're imagining, okay, well, potentially there are other causalities besides speech. We don't fully understand them. Maybe they could even drive human action in ways that are simply not amenable to this kind of like very technical discussion.
I mean, like, if we just get down to the brass tacks of it, if your only argument against the argument from argument is to say, well, let's reject logic for a second. Let's say there's something above logic. Well, I mean, I'd want to see what that thing above logic is. If I think, I imagine the audience could surely agree with me here that to reject logic is the ultimate defeat for any proposal. Because you are trying to propose this.
Potentially, if we're in a marketplace and there's like a bunch of things lined up with each other, and I'm picking them out, and every single one of these things except for this one has stamped on it that this one is logically consistent, then I'll pick the one that's logically consistent.
Right. So if you're going to pick the one that's logically consistent,
but it doesn't strike me that I'm actually in that situation where I'm shopping. Like, it may be the case that everything on offer kind of sucks. What I'm actually doing is I'm trying to discourse to figure out, or in the hopes potentially, and this is consistent with what you were saying as the purposes of argumentation. It might be the case that I'm engaging in argumentation not to get at the truth that my interlocutor has, but maybe by dint of engaging in that activity, in some sense, my intellectual horizons are expanded so that I can grasp something else that's true.
I mean, are they expanded if you think there's something beyond logic? Why are you engaging in this game of logic at all if you think there's something beyond logic, which is actually what truth is?
Well, that's a good question, because even when I say expanded, like, I'm still relying on those same things.
Yeah, which is why it's a self-defeating notion.
Well, not necessarily, though, because I'm using it metaphorically, right? Like, it may be the case that, like, we can implicate things at different dimensions of existence beyond three, right? Like the whole, like, the flatland example. Now we live in the third dimension, so we can't, like, conceptualize what that would look like, because our perception and our cognition is conditioned by it's in the form of the world that we perceive ourselves to be in right now. But just as, like, in flatland, you can have a three-dimensional object appearing in sections as it sort of passes through. We can imagine, even if, like, that's not, like, there is no visible corollary to that for us, we can nonetheless imagine a similar relationship between the existence of something at a higher dimension, something at a, I guess that language doesn't really make sense, but something at existing along different dimensions. Then
I mean, even still, all this is, you're making a mathematics example, but mathematics as well deals with logic. Mathematics is it's entirely logical in its construction as well. Like, you could not even hope to explain to me what idea is that you have. So the fact that you're trying, like, why try? Why debate with anyone? Why make any videos? Why talk to anyone? If you think, true truth, whatever that means, even truth itself is a logical concept. So I don't know. We can't even begin to describe what it is that you're getting at. Whereas I can. So, if people care about getting at what you can actually describe, getting at logic, being logical, then they have to acquiesce to my position.
What does truth mean?
For something to be true, I mean, I don't know how to bring it down into further layers below that. I imagine there's probably some sort of, formal definition of it, but, it's just, I take for granted what truth means. I think we all know what truth means. Truth is when a proposition is correct, which is just, a synonym for truth. Yeah, I don't know how to go further down.
That's when a proposition is true, but do you deny that there can be any truths that are not amenable to being formally represented in a proposition?
I mean, I've never heard of one. As I wouldn't.
Fair enough.
Right. Like, I mean, even if I were to try and think it on my own, I would have to think it in the form of a proposition.
Well, let's assume that you couldn't. Okay. Would that fact by itself stand as justification for the proposition that therefore there isn't one? I mean, it seems to me like, when I think about it, that even that proposition is of a type, right? You're implicating the same kind of thing, just in the negative. Could you say that
So, repeat that for me.
with a clear conscience? I guess. Is the bare fact that a truth, we'll hold that term in suspension right now. Is the fact that a thing could be true, or a state of affairs could be true, or something unutterable, but in some sense standing in a similar relation to the world as true propositions do to our speech? Could that be true, even if it is not amenable to being represented in speech, maybe even at all?
I mean, I don't think so, because you couldn't ever possibly get there through logic, and logic defines the rules of what is true. It's defining the rules of truth.
What defines that logic defines the rules of truth?
I guess I just did. I mean, if you have some sort of transcendental logic or whatever, I mean, hit me with it. But I mean, by definition, you couldn't hit me with it. You couldn't even think about it, right? So this seems like an entirely anti-human epistemology. It seems like an anti-reality epistemology. If reality is what is able to be known, right? It's an anti-epistemology in that sense. If epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge, right, you're talking about things which could not, by definition, be known, because they could not be proposed.
Well, not be known, but there's a distinction between being known and being true, right?
I don't think. I mean, epistemology is all truths are contained within epistemology, right? This is why I'm talking about. You can imagine. I don't think you could, in fact, imagine. You could vaguely get the idea that there is something beyond metaphysics and beyond epistemology, but we could never get there by definition. So, why bother
so you basically
thinking about it?
So you basically take the Kantian position, but instead of using that as a reference, well, okay, you can't even bother thinking about it because you've done two things there. I don't know which one you're solidly on. So on the one hand, you're taking the Kantian position that, like, let's say, like things in themselves, like beyond anything that to understand them as such would be to somehow transcend the form of our intuition, like how we actually receive and perceive concepts in time or whatever. That's a thing we can't do. Now, so you say two things there. You say on the one hand, like, well, it doesn't matter pragmatically, so why bother? Okay. On the other, and correct me on this.
I mean, moreover, why are you bothering? Like, because you clearly care about the laws of logic when you're engaging with them. So you're defeating yourself by saying nobody should care about the laws of logic whilst using the laws of logic. It's Aristotelian in that sense.
Well, maybe I'm saying that in the sense, for example, nobody should care about the laws of logic. I'm using the laws of logic to make it the case that there is no worldly impetus to attempt to do so. That's the whole notion behind like a noble lie, right? And in like Plato's analogy, because the whole idea is you are conditioning the environment such that a potentially damaging, say, pursuit for truth along certain lines becomes unnecessary because the needs that pursuit would satisfy have been satisfied by this great myth that already situates everything in a fixed and useful way for them.
I mean, yeah, I suppose if you don't care about the laws of logic, there's no possible attack I could give against you, because no matter what I say, you can be like, well, I don't actually, it doesn't matter, because, I'm just saying this for the sake of saying it. I don't actually care about it being true, or, it's adhering to logic at all. None of it, what do we even go on to after this point if you don't care about logic at all?
Well, I mean, you probably care about logic insofar as it's implicated in something that you're doing or insofar as it has a use. But I may, for example, have used logic to arrive at the knowledge that it would have been better for me not to, or something like that.
So you're using logic to arrive at that it would have been right. But then what do we do from this point on? Because we're both using logic, right? But then you're saying, well, because of course you reject logic. You're being like, I'm allowed to use logic and reject it at the same time because you're rejecting logic, right? So there's nothing to say. There's nothing to say.
Well, it seems to me that you're arriving at a fundamentally pragmatist ethic where ethical statements are simply that which follows from.
I mean, if pragmatist in this sense means just Aristotelian, then yeah, I suppose I am.
Well, it doesn't just mean Aristotelian though, because you're actually saying that we can't know stuff sort of beyond the forms of our intuition and cognition. But at the same time, you're also saying that like that in itself would belie the statement. I think that there are true things about the world, and that we actually we take in those truths into our minds when we think about them.
Well, I think logic is true. It's just that we map out logic with our minds. You know, we use our reason to discover these logical laws. I think logic is actually true, and we are discovering the entire set of what logic gives you, right? To use a mathematics term. I mean, even mathematics itself, we are discovering new things about mathematics, and you know,
Sure,
that's a type of logic as well.
But when I asked you like what makes it so that logic does this, that logic is.
I mean, I have to presuppose it, right? I mean, everybody has to presuppose it in doing anything they're doing.
Not necessarily. Like, I'm not presupposing it, but I am nonetheless like deploying logic to discuss with you.
So then you have to presuppose it. If you're deploying it, you have to presuppose it.
Well, not necessarily. Like, I may be playing.
What is the actual purpose of your engagement with me here? If you're not trying to get at the truth of the matter, what is your purpose in engaging with me?
I may be trying to get the truth of the matter, but the truth of the matter may not be something that you necessarily will hold for me to get. Even if it's a direct consequence of the conversation.
If you're caring about the truth of the matter, then you have to care about logic, because logic is what truth is. You have some sort of transcendental dealio going on. I mean, it's even beyond transcendental, because transcendental itself is a logic term. You have something beyond everything here.
Transcendental is if we're talking about in a Kantian sense, it doesn't refer to that at all. But if we're talking like in a sort of a colloquial sense, transcendental is gesturing to that which is beyond as a concept by itself, but it isn't trying to encapsulate that which is beyond. That's what the word beyond is supposed to imply.
What specifically are we doing here? Because we're both using logic, but you're saying, well, we should reject logic.
Well, I think specifically what I'm interested in is to bring it down to like the specifics of our conversation leading up to this. Let's assume that your ethics, such as it is, being implied by inevitable consequences of engaging in argumentation. Let's assume that I just accept it 100%, that it holds. Okay. So what? Like, fill me in with that.
Therefore, you ought to be a libertarian. You ought to avoid conflicts.
What does that mean? What does that mean, ought? You ought to be a libertarian.
I mean, I think we both know what ought means.
Well, I'm asking you because I don't. Enlighten me.
What? I mean, it means you should go about doing that. It's the proper thing to do.
Why is it the proper thing to do?
Argumentation ethics.
What makes it the case that argumentation ethics makes that the proper thing to do, and why should I therefore do it?
I mean, you acceded that you agree that argumentation ethics proves these things. I mean, I can go through the proof if you want. If we want to go through the proof of argumentation ethics.
I'm acceding that it in and of itself is internally consistent, that I have no problems with its phrasing. What I'm asking you is, assuming I accept all of that.
No, I mean, it means you could not.
Is the force of it only that according to the rules?
It means you contradict yourself when you try and propose an alternative ethic, which must be false, because contradictions are false. So therefore, the only thing remaining is libertarian ethic.
In Mario 64.
What?
In Mario 64, because we're accepting that.
Sure, and we're living in Mario 64 right now. And so you objectively ought to be a libertarian. I mean, that's the point of contention, right there. And you've acceded it to me. You've ceded the ground to me.
I think I'll accept that outcome for the time being. I would like to explore this further in future. It's pretty late for you. I don't know how long you want to go for.
I mean, I'm willing to go for as long as it takes. I've got a few beers left, you know. We can continue. It might be useful if we do continue to like, you know, let's just, you know, get rid of this whole deep epistemology debate and just get into like the weeds of how do we get to argumentation ethics.
I think that's sort of what we were doing already. I think what I think would be interesting to do, if you're game for this, is I would like you to try and write this out. I'm sure you already have somewhere. Write this out in a way that it can be broken down. I can critique that directly. I can give you the results of that, and then we can discuss those. I think that would be very interesting.
I could just give you the whole document I used to prepare for this.
That works just fine. I'd like to take a couple days to like go over it, maybe a week or so. I'm doing the whole Mr. Girl thing next week, so I'll have so much free time to actually just examine that carefully, and then
sure.
After that we can reconvene and we can continue with this.
Well, I'm packed with debates at the moment, so it might be a while.
That's fine.
All right, yeah, sure. So I'll upload it to GitHub and send it through to you.
Sounds good.
All right,
Thank you very much for coming on. It was actually
you
a fun
too.
discussion.
It was actually very. I was expecting it to be just, you know, pure argumentation ethic. I didn't realize I'd have to, you know, brush up on my philosophy as such before. You know, it was quite fun. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's kind of I want to like develop this a bit more instead of just exhaust ourselves today, because I think we're probably, at least for myself, maybe you've got more stamina than I do, but my brain's tired.
I'm a young buck, you see. I'm a young buck with plenty of beer. I got plenty to
I
go.
mean, I was a young buck who had plenty of beer, so my
yeah, that's how it goes.
All right, take it easy. Have a good night.
You too. See ya.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting, wasn't it, guys? I wasn't expecting a full-on epistemology debate today. Yeah. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for my Austrian methodology versus Keynesian methodology, I think, debate. Now, if you're into econ, you'll be into that one. So yeah, anyway, see you guys. Boop.